please join us in some of the melodies that our teacher shared and taught with us. Melodies from his hometown and also from Siget and also of the Hasidim of Visions.
next song that was sung by Wiesel, and he added a special verse at the end. Rabbi Nehemiah Poland said after this song about the Baal Shem Tov, he's outside the door. So let's see if we can bring the Baal Shem Tov outside the door again.
Avuder Baal Shem, spazieren ist gegangen. Avuder Baal Shem, spazieren ist gegangen. Please join us. Oy vey revenue, revenue, revenue. Oy vey revenue, revenue, revenue. Oy vey revenue.
Unkotev itkitev Isabel de lefaranen Isabel de lefaranen Avuder Baal Shem Oh, is geboren, es ist gegangen Avuder Baal Shem Oh, if is geboren, es ist gegangen Oh, Feigele Faranen, seinen Feigele Faranen, Avuder Baal Shem, Lerin Shira ist gegangen, Avuder Baal Shem, Lerin Shira ist gegangen.
Stiebele Faranen, Stiebele Faranen, Avuder Baal Shem, ich davenen gegangen, Avuder Baal Shem, ich davenen gegangen. Oy vey revenue, revenue, revenue. Oy vey revenue, revenue, revenue. Oy vey revenue. Oy vey revenue, revenue, revenue. Oy vey revenue, revenue.
And there's Rabbi Nehemiah Poland who said he's outside the door, but we're so glad you're inside the door. Love you.
I want to thank my colleagues here, members of the faculty, of all the schools of Boston University, which today is one of the best in the country. Their friendship means much to me. Their collegiality means that our school is very, very special and unique. And thanks to my students. I know every year I say that they are the best, but every year I'm right. Caring, what does it mean? Of course, it means a readiness, a willingness to interfere, and indeed to intervene in someone else's life. And, if possible, to shield it from mishaps and misfortune. Does it mean that to intervene, to care about another person, is to play God? Rather, it means to recognize the humanity of the other, forever frail, vulnerable, and threatened by falling victim to loneliness and despair. In more ways than one, living in society implies interference. Parents, teachers, elected rulers who govern organized structures, aren't they, aren't we, living symbols of intervention? These days of turbulence and convulsion all over the world, the obligation to care, thus to intervene, seems more urgent than ever. Prophets do not seek to be understood or admired. All they want is to be obeyed. They teach by example. They follow God's words. Why shouldn't people follow theirs? People rarely understand what he, the prophet, expects of them. Nor does he understand what God wants of him, but he remains obedient always. Now, is Elisha, son of Shaphat, my favorite prophet? As with the great Hasidic masters whose souls were sent down to put ours on fire, all of the prophets are my favorites, but one at a time. I evoke Isaiah, the prince of the prophets. It is he whom I most admire when I do so. But when I tell of Jeremiah's witness, it is he whose inspiration I seek. Each time I am drawn to a prophet, whether because of the majesty of his language or the intensity of his vision, he becomes the melodious center of my inner landscape. Memory has, of course, haunted all my work. The Jew in me lives, thanks to the memory that I try to capture, carry, and share. Among the vital elements which define man's humanity is also his or her attitude towards memory. Its use defines the goal, if not the essence of civilization. This is true of most generations, but more so of our own. Now we know that it is possible to invoke remembrance for the best and the worst in us, so as to justify our individual or collective behavior. It can pull us up to dazzling summits and also drag us down to the darkness of the abyss. Question: are we allowed to declare at the very outset that whatever is moral is good and what is immoral is evil? Is the great Rabbi Israel Baal Shem Tov, the master of the good name, the founder of the Hasidic movement, right in saying that the other is our mirror? When I look into it, it is myself that I see. And if I see evil in him, it's mine that I discover. To push this attitude to its limit, the question actually would be, was Adolf Eichmann our mirror? To me, in a moral society, the other is not my enemy, but my potential ally and companion. My humanity is defined by his or hers. I can learn from them because they are not like me. There remains something ineffable in every human being. Marcus Aurelius' brother Antoninus Pius was Rabbi Yehuda's friend. Were they each other's mirror? No. They were fellow students and teachers. It is the otherness of the other that attracts me to him or her. I want to learn from them. Where do they come from, carrying what memories, nourishing what aspirations, and articulating or repressing what kind of hopes? I want to know, I want to penetrate the secret universe that inhabits the other. I want to know how to decipher its signals, how to disarm its threats, how to walk together towards the sun, how to make a wanderer smile, a beggar sing, a despairing patient dream. I want to learn with the other, and sometimes from the other, how to ensure the happiness of a child of hungry parents. That's what I expect to do for and with the other. And in doing so, as I shall try to prove later, in doing so, I would say that there is always a choice for us.
I'm Robert Brown, president of Boston University, and I want to welcome everyone here to this ceremony celebrating the life of Elie Wiesel in word, image, and music. Do not turn your back on the past, said Elie Wiesel when he visited his hometown Signet in what is now Romania in 2002, admonishing the Prime Minister who was present for the opening of the museum in Elie's childhood home. Elie added, integrate the past into your life and you will flourish. Forget it and you are doomed. He spoke these words at a time when Romania was grappling with its Holocaust history. He was nudging Romania toward a more forthright reckoning with the past. On that day in 2002, Elie reluctantly seized what our colleagues in the School of Education call a teachable moment. There was a need to seize the moment. In post-communist Romania, culture was building around the memory of Ion Antonescu, the World War II leader who collaborated with Hitler and set in motion pogroms and deportations. Antonescu's resistance to the Russians was being celebrated, and his complicity with the Holocaust ignored or downplayed. In post-Cold War Romania, statues and busts of Antonescu had begun to sprout. It's interesting that statuary can tell us what statuary can tell us about the currents and passions of an era. Elie was a leading witness, arguably the leading witness, to the horrors of the Holocaust. His tragic experience and his gift as a storyteller conferred a moral obligation to ensure that future generations could know the full magnitude of evil, loss, and suffering. So he was perforce an eloquent witness. He was by choice a teacher, and happily for Boston University, one of the great teachers in our history. As a child in Signet, spending countless hours at the synagogue, Elie was immersed in the sacred texts and the traditions of Judaism. His teaching was built upon the sturdy foundation of his early study. He taught from those texts and explained their meaning and relevance. In his enormously popular lectures, offered over 30 years, he wove together his deep knowledge with a marvelously unforced capacity for storytelling. Most of us here today understand, I believe, that when we refer to ancient texts, not because they are part of some dusty history that we somehow ought to be familiar with, but because they speak to what is enduring in human experience, including the idea that to be human is to be inhumane. Elie's legacy is profound and can be seen and felt in every corner of the globe. A tangible, enduring part of his legacy is here in the form of the papers kept at the Gottlieb Archival Research Center, and perhaps most importantly, the recordings, which are easily accessible, of his lectures. Generations from now, a student who will read one of Elie's lectures will seek to know more and find her way to online recordings. She can return to the written word, but now she can hear Elie's rich voice and affecting cadences, pulling the text into a higher relief. At universities, we create new knowledge, sometimes wonderful life-saving and life-changing inventions. We also preserve and protect the knowledge of the past, and lives are saved and enriched if we heed the lessons of the past. We were privileged and blessed to have Elie as a teacher and friend at Boston University.
Good afternoon. My name is Stephen Katz. I'm the Slater Professor of Holocaust Studies here at Boston University and was the founding director of the Elie Wiesel Center for Jewish Studies. It's a great honor and pleasure to address this assembly. I specifically want to thank Abigail Gilman and the President's Office for doing a remarkable job. I begin by telling you that Elie was a colleague here at BU for many years, but our friendship went back nearly 50 years. When we first met, he was not Elie Wiesel, and I don't think I had tenure. So we were sort of on the same kind of plane. And from that time on, I grasped that the most important thing to him was to be a witness, but not a rhetorical witness, but an action-oriented witness, to do things that really made a difference based on his own experience. He wrote about the Ache Indians in Paraguay. He went to Cambodia. He wrote about Soviet Jewry, which was, he told me, for 30 years, a day did not go by that he didn't spend at least an hour dealing with Soviet Jewry. And he meant action. Even on Soviet Jewry, his most fundamental disagreement was with no less a figure than the Lubavitcher Rebbe, who didn't want him to go public, and Elie went public. And after it was all over, the Lubavitcher Rebbe sent him a note and said, "You were right and I was wrong." Didn't happen very often with the Lubavitcher Rebbe. Also, he was a man who had great respect for friendship, great respect for his colleagues. All of his colleagues in the center, from the most junior to the most senior, were always important to him. Also, he based all of his relations on a sense of trust. I can tell you that when Mitterrand, the president of France, who had been his friend for decades, was discovered to have been a member of the Vichy government, Elie asked him to make a public apology. He refused. He said, "This is not something the president of France can do." He and Elie ended their friendship, though Elie had been in Paris almost every week for something important. Recently, there were similar incidents I won't discuss with various Israeli officials. He was also, I want to stress, a man of enormous erudition. You know, people have rightly said that he's a storyteller, and that's, of course, what he was, a great, great storyteller, like the old Magidim who traveled from town to town telling stories. But he was enormously learned. He was a great student that's been mentioned already today of French existentialism, the Sorbonne, where he studied after the war. But even more, he was very deeply educated in Jewish things, not just stories. And he was a pleasure to have as a colleague, because if you got stuck, you could go and talk to him about Kabbalah, about the medieval commentators about Hasidic theology, remarkably educated. There's a wonderful story that he used to study every week with Saul Lieberman, the greatest Talmudic scholar of the 20th century. I remember the morning he called me to tell me in tears that Saul had died. And he told me once that Saul Lieberman said to him, "I'm going to give you smicha, I'm going to make you a rabbi." So I said, "Why do I need to be a rabbi?" He said, "In case you can't make a living." Also, he was someone in this regard. If you violated his trust, if he didn't have confidence in you, he couldn't be moved. And he had a will of iron. You may know or not know he was offered the presidency of Israel twice. I actually had several occasions of deep conversation. I encouraged him to take the position. I thought it would be a climax of a career from Auschwitz to the presidency of the State of Israel. And I knew how strongly he felt about the State of Israel, but he rejected it, saying he would just be a politician. And so he rejected that. He could not be moved. Also, I should say, in all of our collegial relations, which went far beyond the university because of many things we were both involved with, next to his family, the most important thing in his life was the State of Israel. He once told me he would never criticize it in public because he was not a citizen, and he was faithful to that position, made enemies in doing so, and he had the courage to defend it even against people like his friend, President Obama. Obama was someone he admired. You may remember that Obama was having trouble with the Jewish community, so what do? You invite Elie Wiesel to have a picture. So he invited Elie down to Washington. They had lunch. It was on the front page of the New York Times. The next day I called up. I said, "Elie, what's it like having lunch with the president at the White House?" He said, "Well, I'll tell you, Steve. When the president talks, you can't eat. When you answer, you can't eat. It's not much of a lunch." So the fact is, he was an extraordinary person in every regard. Also, he had, his limitations. I remember one night we were at a dinner together, and they put him, of course, at the head table next to Sheldon Adelson and Robert Kraft. So he was in a panic. He called me over. He said, "Steve, I don't know anything about football. I don't know anything about gambling. You got to sit at the table." The truth is, he was someone who was very, very special, made everybody feel very special. Michael said it at our luncheon. Other people have said it. When you were with him, everybody felt it. But see the variety of people today who spoke from all quarters of our community. But you should know that it wasn't easy to be Elie Wiesel. First of all, there's always discussion about his theological views. Near the end of his life, he wrote a piece in the New York Times saying he wanted to make up with God. They had been apart too long. And I think that his whole life, he couldn't live without God and he couldn't live with God. The profundity of Elie's theological position was that he recognized that all the inherited theological explanations were bankrupt after Auschwitz. It's not that he wanted to be a denier. And in fact, late in life, he asked me if I could influence the Holocaust Museum, where I was the academic head of the academic committee, to change the saying that is quoted from Knight over one of the doorways, which gives a negative impression. But he was convinced that all the orthodoxies, whether the orthodoxies of the left or the orthodoxies of the right or the traditional explanations of because of our sins, we are punished, all of them were bankrupt. And therefore, we had to have a new relationship with heaven. Also, he was very, very, very concerned with every day. He would pick up the New York Times and he would see something was happening in Sudan. Or he'd pick it up and see something happened, of course, 20 years ago in Yugoslavia. And he would call and words were always the same. "Stephen, we have not learned anything." And so he would get on the phone and try to influence the president. It was Elie's influence with Bill Clinton that's caused the bombing in Yugoslavia that ended the slaughter. All kinds of behind-the-scenes events were his consideration. Also, I should say, with regard to the State of Israel, he was devoted. He told me how once in a while he would go to Ben Gurion Airport, and he would just wait for the planes of Soviet emigres to come so he could watch them get off the plane and kiss the ground. So let me just say that all of this meant that he was a remarkable, remarkable person. He was a great friend. If he trusted you, there was nothing he wouldn't do. No matter where he was in the world, he would return a phone call. He would write a letter. He would introduce you to his friends. On several occasions, memorable for me, we had dinner with Kofi Annan, with Václav Havel, the president of Czechoslovakia. He had great curiosity. I would come back from meetings from an international organization I'm involved with. He always wanted to know what was happening, who was there, who wasn't there. And he was very clear on who the good guys were and who the bad guys were. And he let you know, and he let other people know. So I hope you will understand if I say, in a few minutes, it's hard to sum up this remarkable, heroic, special man. But the fact is that he cared about us all. If you were his friend, he cared about you specifically. We cared about him, and we miss him very, very much. Thank you.
Everyone here knows that Elie Wiesel was a great moral leader, a great spiritual leader, a great leader. But Elie's greatness extended into the realm of music. Many of you know that Elie Wiesel had a wonderful voice. He understood that music was a repository of memory, and as a prince in the kingdom of memory, he understood exactly how to use it. He was a choral conductor in Paris after World War II, conducting a girls' choir. And it was not an accident that he loved choral music, because it combined two of his great loves, text and music. We're going to sing two pieces for you that Elie loved. The first is from something called the Great Hallel, the great song of praise to God. It's 26 verses, 26 because that's the numerology of God's name. And it is composed of two different forms. The text is Sheb Shiflenu Zachar Lanu. In our lowliness, God remembered us. Kili olam chasto, may God's mercy endure forever. Vayifrakenu mitzarenu, and released us from our tormentors. Now, there are two ways of looking at that text. At the beginning of the piece, you'll hear the position of the victim, the position of the Jewish people for over 2 millennia. But in the middle, in this vicious niggin that Elie loved, you can hear how this is the tune of a believer, not the sufferer, the believer in God who is going to redeem the Jewish people. Sheshiflenu zachalanu oi, vayifrekenu mitzareinu oi. Sheshiflenu zachalanu oi, vayifrekenu mitzareinu oi. Sheshiflenu zachalanu oi. Vayifrekenu mitzareinu Sheb shiflenu zachalanu, sheb shiflenu zachalanu, kili olam chazdo. Sheb shiflenu zachalanu, sheb shiflenu zachalanu, kili olam chazdo. Sheb shiflenu zachalanu, kili olam chazdo. Sheb shiflenu zachalanu, kili olam chazdo. Sheb shiflenu zachalanu, sheb shiflenu zachalanu, kili olam chazdo. 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 Sheb shiflenu zachalanu, sheb shiflenu zachalanu, kili olam chazdo. Sheb shiflenu zachalanu, sheb shiflenu zachalanu, kili olam chazdo. Shepshifleinu zachar lanu, ki le'olam chasdo. Shepshifleinu zachar lanu, ki le'olam chasdo. Shepshifleinu zachar lanu, oy, vayifrekeinu mitzareinu. Shepshifleinu zachar lanu, oy, vayifrekeinu mitzareinu, oy. Shepshifleinu zachar lanu, oy, vayifrekeinu mitzareinu, oy. Our second and last piece was Elie's favorite song, Ani Ma'amin. It was his favorite text. It's a text of the great Maimonides, the 12th of Maimonides' great principles. Ani Ma'amin be'emuna shlema. I believe in complete faith. B'viat HaMashiach, in the coming of the Messiah. V'af al pi sheyit mameha. And even though the Messiah will tarry, Achakelo, I'll wait for him. B'chol yom she'avo, for every day that the Messiah might come. Now, this is a song that I learned at Elisha's bar mitzvah, when Elie all of a sudden remembered this song, and he started singing it. He asked me to arrange it, and we performed it many times at the 92nd Street Y. Unfortunately, never here at BU, sir, sorry. But we were able to sing it in Carnegie Hall as well. And what's great about this piece is that it combines everything that Elie believed in music. Elie knew a lot of music. It wasn't just Jewish music that he was expert in. He knew Beethoven. He could sing Beethoven's 7th Symphony. We did it many times together. He loved that second movement. He knew Brahms, he knew Mozart. But this was his favorite piece. And finally, he told us why it was his favorite piece. Because not only was it a song from his youth, but when he was still in Sighet, before he was deported, someone who was in the camps escaped and came to Sighet. And everyone around him was saying, tell us, what is it? Tell us what's happening. And the person refused to tell the story. Went on through Shabbos. All of Shabbos, they pestered him, and he refused to tell. Finally, at the end of Shabbos, he relented. And in answer to the question of what's happening over there in that night, he sang this song. Ani amamin be'emunah shlema bevias HaMashiach. Ani amamin be'emunah shlema bevias HaMashiach. Ani amamin be'emunah shlema bevias HaMashiach. V'af al pi she'yismameach achakelo b'chol yom she'yavo. V'af al pi she'yismameach achakelo b'chol yom she'yavo.
Bevias
Bevias HaMashiach. HaMashiach. Ani amamin be'emunah. Beviat HaMashiach. Bevias HaMashiach. B'chol yom sheyavo.
Good afternoon. I'm Pam R. Taub. On behalf of all of the students of Elie Wiesel, I'm honored to be here as a former student of Elie Wiesel. There are so many titles that I have in my life, such as cardiologist, researcher, scientist, mother, wife, but the title that I'm most proud of is to be a student of Elie Wiesel. I think it really reflects the core of who I am as a person. When I was growing up in a very small town in Central Florida, books were really my connection to the wider world. When I was 13 years old, I read Night and was completely transformed and incredibly moved. And the stars aligned where I got to attend Boston University and I got to study with Professor Wiesel. I actually studied with him when I was a sophomore because Martha Hauptman, who's here, I think saw in me some potential and let me into the class, and I was probably one of the youngest people to study with Elie Wiesel as a sophomore, and then I subsequently studied with him in my junior year. In my sophomore year, I took a class called Writers on Writing, and in my junior year, I took a class called Exile and Imagination in Jewish Literature. And through Professor Wiesel's classes, I got introduced to some of the greatest writers of our time. And through these books, he really highlighted some of the commonalities in our life experiences despite our different backgrounds. And what I remember most about the class is it was so much fun. It was the class that I really looked forward to the most. And I think most of you know this, but Professor Wiesel has a really great sense of humor, and we laughed as we learned. And one of the things that he taught us is our future cannot realize its potential unless we remember and learn from the past. And he was really an incredible friend and mentor to me. He instilled in me a love of literature, and to this day, even if I'm in the hospital taking care of patients with heart attacks, I always manage to get 1 or 2 novels in. And I give all of my patients book recommendations, and they always joke that they get their medical care from me, and also they get a good book recommendation from me. And there's so many things that I learn from him that I apply every day to every patient that I see. One of the things that he really made us feel in the class was that each of our stories and experiences were unique. He made it a point to meet with each of us individually and really got to know us. And when a Nobel Peace Prize winner takes time out of his busy schedule to meet with you in a one-on-one session when you're 19 years old, that really gives you a lot of confidence in life. When you're in his presence, you feel his warmth, and you really feel like you're the most important person in the room. And this is what I try to do with all of my patients. I let them know that their experiences and suffering is unique, and each person is very important to me. I have the privilege of taking care of everyone in our hospital, from drug addicts to billionaires. And I realize that everyone really needs to feel like they're the most important person in the room, and they need to know that you care. And I think Professor Wiesel's legacy is he taught us all how to truly care, and that is how we allow for his legacy to live on, is really by caring for other people. The other thing he taught me is it doesn't matter what you achieve or how much money you make, but the most important thing you can do is show others you care, and that will eventually translate into great things. Elie truly cared about everyone, and his legacy is getting all of us to do the same. Towards the end of his life, I had the opportunity to visit with him in New York, and we were talking about his life and the current state of world affairs, and he said something to me that really moved me and upset me. He said, I haven't done enough. And he really, truly felt that he hadn't done enough. And I was kind of appalled that Elie Wiesel felt like he hadn't done enough. And I think it's also an incredible reflection of how humble he is, that he really felt that he hadn't done enough. And so I thought to myself, it's really time for the rest of us to do more, so he doesn't feel that that burden is all on him. Thank you.
Good afternoon. My name is Pnina Lahav, and I'm a member of the Faculty of Law at Boston University. I'm also affiliated with the Elie Wiesel Center for Judaic Studies. I wish to tell you very briefly about my first encounter with Elie Wiesel. It was many years ago. Elie's public lectures, given around this time of year in this hall, were extremely popular. Some of you may remember this setup, very simple: the table, the chair, the lamp, the plant. That's all there was. And he was sitting in this chair and giving each and every person the feeling that he was speaking directly to you. That was something that always amazed me. And I always said to myself, I wish I could replicate it in my own huge classes, but I don't think I ever did. As we say in my trade, people were hanging from the chandeliers to hear Elie Wiesel in those days. It was not easy to get a seat here. Before every lecture, a member of Boston University faculty was invited to present Elie. It was, as you may understand, a great honor. I was one of the first women invited to introduce Elie Wiesel. We did not have too many women at BU at the time. Nor did we dream we'll have a provost or a dean of the law school who is a woman. So thank you. I come from Israel, and I knew that the relationship between Elie and Israelis was not always smooth. Basically, Israelis resented the fact that after the Holocaust, Elie chose to immigrate to America rather than to come to Israel. I thought that was a rather chauvinistic approach, and I decided to use the opportunity to apologize to Elie for the behavior of my compatriots. Of course, I knew very well that I did not have a collective mandate to apologize, but I thought it would be the right thing to do. I think that Elie valued that. I also wanted to address the substantive corpus of Elie's work. Many remember his seminal novel, Night, and think that his work is mainly Holocaust-related. I argued that there was much more to Elie's work. Elie's work, in my opinion, was first and foremost about Jewish life, the intellectual work of Jewish thinkers, rabbis, Talmudic scholars, biblical personalities, as we saw here in the segments that we got in the video a bit earlier. Elie's mission was to make sure that the world of Jewish life, which the Nazis sought to extinguish, lives on. And not only does it live on, but that it is alive and relevant to this generation and to the generations to come. Elie liked my presentation. I believe that he was pleased. I believe that he was pleased to hear an Israeli give him the recognition that he so richly deserved. And he was pleased to see the substance of his work recognized by an Israeli. The next day, I picked up the phone in my office, and Elie himself was on the other line. He invited me to his office, we became friends, and the rest of is history. Elie's work, recording, expanding, interpreting, and enriching Jewish life and contributions, is also the mission of the Elie Wiesel Center for Judaic Studies at Boston University. I think that had he seen the extraordinary intellectual activity taking place at the Wiesel Center now, under the leadership of Professor Michael Zank and Professor Abigail Gilman last year, he would be extremely pleased and very proud. The center is a living tribute to Elie Wiesel and is one of the great distinctions of Boston University, and I feel honored to be a part of it, in addition to doing my work as a law professor. Thank you.
I'm Martha Hauptman. I had the privilege of being Elie Wiesel's personal assistant for 27 years at Boston University. What could I say in 5 minutes? 27 years in 5 minutes. Let me just say, I've been asked to speak about him as a teacher, what I witnessed in his classroom, because the biggest benefit that I had was the privilege of sitting in on every one of his classes. I didn't care, President Brown, if I had to work till 9 o'clock at night, but I would not miss sitting in on one of his classes. So I've been asked to tell you, maybe you don't know, the classes he taught. The general topic was literature of memory, but the topic, the subtitle, changed every single term. He never taught the same course twice in all those years. What faculty would want to do a new syllabus every single time? Well, he wanted to learn. He wanted to read new things. So his teaching assistants with him would make up a syllabus, and often it was because of the interest of the teaching assistant. If somebody wanted to do Hasidism, he would suggest the classes, but often the teaching assistant had the special honor of suggesting a course or a reading, and he'd go along with it. So the courses were things such as Jewish Women's Voices, The Literature and Philosophy of Friendship, Rabbi Nachman, Hasidic Masters, on and on. And in those courses, first of all, they were not all Jewish courses. They included world literature from Goethe to Plato, Kafka, and Camus. Professor Katz referred to his scholarship. Shakespeare, the Greek tragedies, that was included in the syllabi. Biblical text, Mary Shelley's Frankenstein. Students read Cynthia Ozick, Tolstoy, Dostoevsky. He used the Socratic method, I think it was referred to by someone this morning, where students would get up and do a presentation and there'd be dialogue in the class. They were not lecture classes, and many students commented that they were disappointed at the beginning because they didn't come to hear each other, they came to learn from Elie Wiesel. Well, they learned lessons far more than what they expected to get out of his class. Let me say that when he walked into the classroom, a hush would come over the room. Students were in awe of him, but it didn't take long for them to see that he wasn't an icon, he was a human being. Some of the comments of the students, I would encourage them. He wanted to meet every student for a personal appointment. Some took advantage of it and met him more than once. Others missed the opportunity. They just were too overwhelmed with his reputation and they just couldn't do it. But others became friends of his, like Pam, for life. And by the way, Pam didn't say that the seminar was an upper-level seminar, so when I admitted her as a sophomore, it was an exception. And she is exceptional, I'm sure you will agree. They were not just Jewish students in the class. They were Jew, Gentile, Hindu, from everywhere represented at Boston University, and they were studying disciplines from physics to business. They weren't only literature students or philosophy students, although many of those certainly came to his classes. So I'd like to just give you some comments that came from the students after they walked out of that 10-minute appointment. The office felt like sacred space, like I was in a cathedral, one Catholic student said. The dedication of the students. There was one law student who was very pregnant. He would teach his classes from Monday to Monday. Well, she came to a Monday class, and lo and behold, she delivered this baby before the next Monday class and came to the class 40 hours after her baby was born, bringing the newborn baby to the class because she didn't want to miss a class with Elie Wiesel. There was a student who came from Brown University. She had seen Elie at Birkenau because she was, as a high school student, went on the March of the Living, and she decided it was an opportunity to study with him, so she cross-registered and took the class, traveled 2 hours on a train for an 8:30 a.m. class at Boston University. Her fellow students just couldn't get over it, but she knew what she was doing. Then another drove 2 hours from New London, Connecticut. They were devoted to him, but they knew he was devoted to them. And here's an example. From one day, Monday to the next, in between that first Monday, he received an invitation from President Mitterrand of France to come for breakfast the next Monday. Well, he hadn't told his class that he wouldn't be there, so he had me do a telephone hookup from Paris to the classroom. There was no Skype in those days, and so he could open the class on that Monday that he was going to be missing, apologize to his students for not being there. We, of course, got someone to cover the class. And he opened the class and raised the questions that they could consider. What faculty member would do that? I just can't imagine. Other people have talked about the tremendous respect in the class. He gave students a chance to express themselves, and he wanted to learn. He really wanted to learn from them as much as they wanted to learn from him. Now, in the first class he taught, the very first class, which I took before I was his personal assistant, he taught a course on the Holocaust. He never taught that again. He left it to other scholars to teach that subject because he felt it took too much out of him. And it was a huge class because nobody controlled how many came into it. After that, it became a seminar, and it was supposed to be 40 people. Well, I don't know about the fire laws at Boston University, but I didn't have the heart to turn students away, so sometimes it would be as many as 60 students sitting around a seminar table. And let's see. Oh, yes, one of my favorite things that he said, he taught his students, when they were overwhelmed with how much was going on in the world and how much there was to do and, what should they do, he said, do something, anything. Just start somewhere, anywhere, to fix the world. Do we need him today? Some of you may know that after Charlottesville, online, there were dozens of comments from people who were quoting Elie Wiesel, that neutrality never helps the victim. And just today, the words are still there. He was contracted to teach 2 courses a year, but winters in Boston was such that, so one was in the fall and one was in the spring, but the winters were awful, so the weather made it difficult to travel from New York. So it was decided that he would teach the 2 courses in the fall and stay over on Monday night. Then the next class would be Tuesday morning. So he had all Monday afternoon for office hours. So he had plenty of time to meet with students, and students always had the priority. I remember when he won the Nobel Prize and journalists descended on Boston University, he kept his schedule with his students. They just had to wait. He had maybe 8 teaching assistants during the course of my time with him, one a year, or sometimes occasionally 2. And most of them are here. One who is not here, Paul Gay, sent me a message, and I'm sorry that he's not here to say it himself, but he wrote, I do think his spirit is with and among us. That, like Job and the prophets, Plato and the philosophers, Dante and Shakespeare and the poets, troubadours like Leonard Cohen, his voice is still with us, speaking through his written and spoken words and burning in our hearts. Death is in and through such persons, la vita nuova. Love is stronger than death. I would like to read the poem I wrote right after he died, because I was hearing from so many students who just wanted to share their grief, wanted a group hug. And I wrote this poem in memoriam for Elie. Out of the cauldron of the death camps, he survived to tell the cruel tale, a tale filled with pain and suffering, with starvation and loss, the tale of the kingdom of night. Yet in his life, he was so much more than that teller of dark tales. His days were lived with great purpose, no time ever wasted, not for him. For the survivor, every day is a gift, and surely he lived each day to its fullest. Myriad accomplishments were his, the greatest of the world's honors bestowed upon him. Wherever people suffered on earth, he tried to be there as support, making their cause known. He was our moral guide, a model of kindness and caring. As teacher, as leader, Elie led the way. We who knew him and loved him were privileged to share joy and song and laughter. Loving husband and father, devoted grandpa, dear friend and teacher, far more than sadness filled his days. He walked with presidents, kings and princes. He was larger than life, but wherever he was in the world, we believed that his heart was with us in the classroom. The pain for his students, his admirers as well. The pain of his now stilled voice is unbearable. So hard to believe that we are on this earth that continues to spin and Elie is no longer present. We weep and we weep, for our hearts are broken. The master is gone, but to honor his memory, may we never be indifferent to the suffering of others. May we continue his great work, and may he rest in peace.
To say You're my sister, and I love you with the love of the Lord.
In a tribute to John Silber, my father wrote, "What is my field? A few stories from the Bible, a few tales from the Talmud, a few legends from the Hasidic kingdom, a few words, prayers, years from a forbidden universe, and that is all. There is much difference between John Silber and me. Difference, but not distance. Nowhere is John an outsider. Like ancient philosophers whose quest for knowledge was not limited to one field, he knocks at all gates, and if they resist, too bad, he enters anyway." Dr. Brown, Professor Zank, Professor Gilman, Archive Director Palladino, thank you for inviting us to remember my father today, in this place where the gates of knowledge lie open before us. Thank you for remembering his friendship with John Silber and with this university. Thank you for your own friendship with him. This time of year was a difficult time of year for my father. Did each September, or more precisely, each Chodesh Elul in the Hebrew calendar, did each one get progressively more difficult for him as he got older? Or did I just get more attuned to his feelings as I got older? Perhaps it was both. As Rosh Hashanah, the Jewish New Year, got closer each year, I could see his attention wander. I could see him spending more time in Siget Shalmala, the Siget above, the Siget that was. I could see him reviewing the entirety of his life before God and questioning if he had done enough, truly uneasy at the thought of how he should be judged. And as I sat by my father's side in shul, was my grandfather somehow on his other side, somehow just behind the wall my father leaned against? But once upon a time, this was also an exciting time of year for my father. I have memories from childhood of him rushing out the apartment door to catch a plane to Boston, eager for his encounters with his beloved students, steadied by the firm and capable hands of Martha Hauptman, grateful for and humbled and inspired by his friendship with John Silber. In the years since my father stopped teaching at Boston, he was blessed with other fruitful academic relationships, but no other institution had such a powerful pull on the season of fall. No other force introduced such a rhythm of excitement into these months where the days begin growing shorter. Do you know what this place meant to my father? How it anchored him in the present? Even as the past pulled at him more fervently than ever? Do you realize how much his dialogue with the young minds here invigorated him and opened up for him the possibility of the future? You have some sense, I think we all do, of that tension between past and present that accompanies this transition of seasons. The summer comes to an end. The city and campus hum with activity. There is urgent work to be done in both. And the rabbis from their pulpits and synagogue remind us that there is urgent work to do within ourselves, that time is running out as Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur approach, that we must race to repair our relationships with God and our fellow man. It is a highly charged time in the annual Torah cycle, the weekly Parsha readings that tell the story of the Jewish people. Yesterday in Shul, we read the Parshaot Nitzavim and Vayelech. The Jewish people are on the verge of crossing the Jordan River into Israel after decades in the desert. And Moses is running out of time, and he knows it. He is preparing to compose a final poem, to sing a final song. It is beautiful and dramatic as he lays hands on Joshua and tells the people of Israel to have confidence, that they can move forward with a new generation of leaders and live beautiful lives if they remain true and keep God's message close to their hearts. What was that message? And I remember a fall afternoon 2 years ago sitting outside with my father. We were sitting quietly, not talking, just being in each other's presence. And he started crying because he knew that he would be going soon. And he wanted so much to walk further with us. He couldn't bring himself to say those words, so he whispered them. What was my father's message? Listen to the prophet Isaiah, Yeshayahu, in yesterday's Haftorah, the reading from the prophets. Elman Sion la'achashe, uleman Yerushalayim lo eshkot. For the sake of Zion I will not be silent, and for the sake of Jerusalem I will not rest, until her righteousness comes out like brilliance, her salvation burns like a torch. Not to be silent, not to rest. When I see friends standing up for DACA dreamers or refusing to accept false moral equivalents in Charlottesville, or demanding that the world recognize the Jewish state of Israel's right to exist, I hear the message, and I feel him with us. But there was something about my father that went deeper than his humanitarian efforts and social activism, something that was a source of those outward manifestations. Listen now to the words of Parshat Nitzavim, the Torah portion proper. Ki hamitzvah hazot asher anochi mitzavcha hayom lo niflati mimcha velo rachakahi. For this commandment which I command you this day, it is not concealed from you, nor is it far away. Lo vashamayim hi lemor, mi yaleh lanu hashamayma v'ikach lanu v'shmanu otav v'nasena. It is not in heaven that you should say, who will go up to heaven for us and fetch it for us, to tell it to us so that we can fulfill it. V'lo ma'ever hayam hi lemor, mi yaver lanu el ever hayam v'ikacheha lanu v'yishmanu otav v'nasena. Nor is it beyond the sea that you should say, who will cross to the other side of the sea for us and fetch it for us and tell it to us so that we can fulfill it. Ki karov elecha davar me'od beficha uvilvavcha lasoto. Rather, this thing is very close to you. It is in your mouth and in your heart so that you can fulfill it. My father's message was not so divinely intricate that it required rabbinic interpretation. His methods were not so convoluted that international academic journeys are required. His message is one that I believe John Silber, the devoted student of Kant, would have appreciated as a manifestation of the categorical imperative, that every action you make should be an action you would want repeated the world over. Because it was not just what my father said. It was how he lived his life. He treated others as he would have wanted to be treated, with gentleness. It is my belief that in this sense, the messenger was the message. My father's actions and words and bearing, these are the emanations of a painfully human and profoundly spiritual being. And in the respect and courtesy and interest and compassion he showed everyone he touched. In these ways, he taught us all what we already knew but had forgotten, that we are divine sparks, each and every one of us. And to connect at the level of one divine spark to another is not an idea that is in heaven or over the sea. It is with you. It is in your mouth and in your heart, the way you treat others. The messenger was the message. Has some part of him stayed with you? Do you walk your friend to the elevator or the lobby and not just the front door the way he did? Do you put aside what you are doing and give your full attention when a child or an adult has a story they want to share? If you are his student but are now a teacher, do you treat every student or every patient, Pam, as a soul to be carefully heard and nurtured during your time with them? If remembering my father leaves you a little less cynical, a little less self-absorbed, a little more open to other people than you would have been otherwise, then the message is still being received, still being broadcast, and the messenger is still here. I can feel him here with us today. Can you?
I'm Ann Cudd, Dean of Arts and Sciences and Professor of Philosophy, and I'm honored beyond words to be in the presence of this company and to give this call to action. Elie Wiesel's work has long inspired me in my work as a philosopher of oppression. The Holocaust is the most extreme example of the violent oppression of a people, and so any study of oppression must take lessons from it. In his writings, Professor Wiesel made the Holocaust more than an accounting of humans' lives lost. He made suffering personal, captured our attention with a searing narrative, and drew moral lessons, which, through his work, are burned into our consciousnesses. No one could have blamed him if, having suffered so personally and so deeply from the near annihilation of his people, he had focused narrowly on the plight of the Jews. But Professor Wiesel cared about the human condition generally, and recognized human cruelty and genocide in so many other times and places, from the apartheid in South Africa and the Argentinian disappeared, to the genocides in Bosnia, Rwanda, and Armenia. And in many other cases of repression and violence, he called out oppression. Human suffering anywhere, he wrote, concerns men and women everywhere. He certainly lived up to that imperative. I take several maxims for action from Professor Wiesel's work. First, see oppression for what it is. Oppressors try to conceal the immorality of their actions behind rationalizations dressed up in rhetoric that appeals to a common bias or enthusiasm of the time. Whenever a group of people is dehumanized or degraded, there can be no legitimation. Those who accept this rhetoric are acquiescing to evil. The second maxim is to speak out about oppression so that those who are in power are embarrassed and may be motivated to stop it. When they are unable to conceal what they are doing, oppressors will be forced to fight or flee. In his Nobel speech, Professor Wiesel said about the Holocaust that the world did know and remained silent, and that is why I swore to never be silent whenever and wherever human beings endure suffering and humiliation. And the third maxim is to do something about the persistence of oppression. Do not sit idly by, hoping it will stop. Stand up and make noise. He wrote, "Neutrality helps the oppressor, never the victim. Silence encourages the tormentor, never the tormented. Sometimes we must interfere. Wherever men and women are persecuted because of their race, religion, or political views, that place must, at that moment, become the center of the universe." Professor Wiesel chose to teach compassion by making oppression and evil visceral. He taught it by juxtaposing it to oppression and encouraged young people to create a better future. We have heard from many impressive people today who have done great and good things, inspired by his patient and passionate teaching. Elie Wiesel was also a fierce warrior with his words. He stood up to popes and presidents, rebuked world leaders and international organizations when he saw them standing idly by. He lived by his conviction that one person of integrity can make a difference of life and death. Boston University has been graced by several warriors for peace and justice. The great dean of Marsh Chapel, Howard Thurman, meditated on the courage required to see and fight oppression. He wrote, "I seek courage to see and to do the true thing. To do the true thing places a searching liability on the integrity of the person who does the deed. The truer the deed, the more responsibility involves all of a man's life. I seek courage to do the true thing that my own life may not be double talk. Elie Wiesel possessed this kind of courage to an almost unprecedented extent, and may his memory encourage us all that we may bring about a time in which all human beings are treated with dignity and respect. Martin Luther King famously said, "The arc of the moral universe is long, but it bends towards justice." That is a hopeful thought, but it is only through courageous words and deeds that we can actualize that in the world. The life and teachings of Elie Wiesel, like that of Martin Luther King Jr. and his mentor, Howard Thurman, endow Boston University with a great honor, but also special responsibility. We must live up to their examples of courage in the face of injustice by teaching our students their message of peace, justice, and leadership, even when that is difficult. Not to do so would be to be hypocritical to what they stood for and who we are today because of them. As their intellectual heirs, we must also speak truth to power and teach our students to do so as well.
Bob Hill, Dean, Marsh Chapel. Now, as we prepare to depart this place, we want to gather ourselves with a sense of a call to service under the aspects, let us say, of hospitality and of memory and of kindness. Some many years ago, January of 1979, Jan and I were invited to a dinner party in the home of Robert McAfee Brown. He wrote the introduction to one of the editions of the book Night and was a colleague, friend of Elie Wiesel's for many years. He and his wife, Sydney, had been met when they were students of Reinhold Niebuhr, so they would have known the stories along Riverside Drive of Abraham Heschel and Reinhold Niebuhr gathering in the evening to walk together and to speak in love of the things of love. That evening, we were gathered in January in the snows of 1979 in a small dinner party in the home of the Browns, and they had a special reason because they had a special guest, and that special guest was Professor Elie Wiesel, who taught part of the week in New York and part of the week in Boston, and he offered himself to those of us who were only learning about life and work and philosophy and history in an act of gracious hospitality. We can too. We want to as well. Even as together we're called to action in collective terms, we personally, individually, can begin under the aspect of hospitality. Likewise, memory. How many memories this desk and this chair and this lamp and this plant do evoke for those of us who, with 1,000 each evening, gathered here to listen to the remembrance, to the memory of what had come before. The word of the prophet stands out for us, Micah 6:8. What does the Lord require of thee but to do justice, to love kindness, to walk humbly with thy God, and to do so with a sense of memory of what has come before, empowered by memory. And likewise, and third, under the aspect of kindness, in the summer of 2010, 7 years ago, my father died unexpectedly. You know, the way we grieve is very personal to us. Our sense of loss and our pattern of grieving is about the most personal thing about you or me, more personal than almost anything else about us. It's a part of the remembrance through which we are moving even in this setting today. In those months, there were many condolences. One came, though, through the work of part of the administration at the university represented here today. And it was a simple note sent from Elie Wiesel that said, "Dear friend, my deepest sympathies. We have a saying in our tradition, may you be spared any further sorrow." I covet, I prize, I hold such an act of kindness. Together, perhaps going from this place, we can live under the aspects, day by day, personally, individually, of hospitality and of memory and of kindness, carrying with us a sense of presence, as the psalmist said. Whither shall I go from thy spirit? Whither shall I flee from thy presence? If I ascend to heaven, thou art there. If I make my bed in Sheol, thou art there. If I take the wings of the morning and travel to the uttermost parts of the sea, even there thy hand shall lead me, thy right hand shall hold me. If I say, let only the darkness cover me, and the light about me be as night, even the darkness is not dark to thee. The night is as bright as the day, for darkness is as light with thee. Will you, can you, shall we join together and move forward personally under the guidance and aspect of hospitality and of memory and of kindness? Amen.